Hello? Hello? Is everyone here to learn about some WXT or not? Because that's what I'm presenting. Okay, so, oh wait, hold on, big red button. There we go. Alright, so my name is Mathew Winstone. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Clover Labs. I'm also president of the Ottawa Drupal Association, and then I'm also very much like barbecuing and riding my one wheel. So our office is located here. It's actually surprisingly not far from here, up in Canada. And we build web applications for using Drupal for governments, nonprofits, small sites, big sites, whatever, and we offer support. And we also helped organize this event. So thank you very much for coming once again. Okay, so what is WXT/wet bow? Who here actually understands or knows what this is? Okay, Jose, of course he knows. Yeah. So a few people do know what wet bow. Okay. For those who for the uninitiated, so this is the old stuff that Robin wasn't talking about this morning. So his presentation makes mine look like ancient, but that's okay. So wet bow is the current implementation of the federal government's sort of standard look and feel for websites. So for their intranet sites, for their main public sites, Canada.ca. It's an open source library that defines what the markup should be, what the classes should be, what the accessibility standards and specs are for all of their sites, and it is based on Bootstrap 3. So not 4, not 5, 3. Fine. You know what? I actually need my speaker notes because I can't get it to show up on my phone. So everyone okay with slightly smaller slides? Yeah? Okay, cool. Okay. So, confusingly, there's also something else called WXT, which is the WXT profile. And this is the Drupal install profile implementation of wet bow, or for the federal government's look and feel. So from their website is a Drupal distribution, which is production proven, that includes reusable tools, components for building and maintaining innovative enterprise web apps and multilingual, accessible, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a website dedicated to it, which copy paste is apparently not working. Copy. Tab paste. There we go. So the Drupal WXT, so you can get a sense for what kind of organizations actually have adopted the use of WXT. So some of these clients used to use it, some of them currently use it, but it's a standard that is mainly focused on federal government, but can be adopted and is often adopted by other organizations that are government related, or like provincial or municipal governments that have similar accessibility and multilingual requirements as the federal government does. So it's a pretty neat distro. So the primary advantages of WXT and Drupal WXT specifically is the big ones being the accessibility. So it follows the spec which has already been defined by the federal government. So it's a pretty safe bet if you're going to be implementing something for a federal government client or a government client generally, that will meet their accessible requirements. Once you actually get it off for review and get it tested, it is most likely to be okay. And if someone comes back saying, no, I don't think this should work this way, you can be like, actually, it's supposed to work exactly like that. And then explain why, and then talk about that. The other reason that the other thing that WET and the Drupal install profile gives you is the branding. So when we get into the many live demos I have. No video recording, I'm doing them proper live. So the branding includes basically any kind of look that you could imagine out for the federal government. So whether it be the old-timey intranet with like the blue banner thing at the top, or the new Canada.ca look and feel, and then I think they have some other intranet ones that don't use. Yeah. Joseph basically maintains the distribution, so anything that I say is wrong, you can just tell me when yeah. And then the other thing is multilingual. So Drupal is great. Like when you go look at many other like projects and things, the way it handles multilingual is fantastic, but it's still not perfect, especially as you get into like the newest versions of Drupal, or something that was in the experimental things in core now being stable. Often the parts that aren't stable are the multilingual part of core. So WxT brings in like, I don't know how many patches at this point that actually make or fix or grab code that people have written that will usually eventually get into core or into the contrib modules to make them multilingual. So WxT brings all that in for you right off the bat, because everything in there has to work in both languages, or however many languages you want it to run in. Okay, so so WxT is great, except so the main disadvantages, and this is the big one for me, is that Bootstrap 3 is ancient at this point. It is very old. It is completely unsupported by the Bootstrap project. They've gone through Bootstrap 3 was end of life. I'm pretty sure Bootstrap 4 is end of life already too. So you got 5 to hop on board with if you really want to, and it also heavily requires jQuery still, and that's mainly because Bootstrap 3 really requires jQuery for things. So you have a pretty dated framework with a relatively dated, JavaScript library to sort of like drag along with you.
Although, to the defense of Bootstrap 3, the Webbo 4, they've cooked in a lot of the big features that
they've
Bootstrap 5
backported.
has.
Yeah.
So like equal heights in your columns, your grid.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff so basically it's not really missing anything with Bootstrap 5.
Yeah, but yeah, someone had to backport that stuff. It's still Bootstrap 3. Yeah. And the other disadvantage that we have with the WxT profile currently is that there's a pretty complex interdependency with all of the submodules for all the things that it wants to do. So if you want to turn on workflows or the editor or any of the other stuff, we'll see it later on. When we turn something on, it turns on like everything. Like there's a ton of stuff that gets enabled by just wanting to do one thing. Okay, so now this is my opinion. There are some people that might disagree with it, but the big question is that when we have clients that are like not necessarily federal government, but they're close enough, or even just people that, like I said, that have similar requirements as the federal government does as far as accessibility, multilingual, and so on. It's like, when should I actually even should I use WxT or WxT at all? If you are a department within the federal government, and yes, that is your go-to, that is your de facto starting point. It is probably the quickest way to get a site up and running to run your blog or news post or intranet site or whatever. It is a lot better than the Adobe Experience Manager thing, but anyway. So I would highly recommend using that. If you're an NGO or you're partially funded by the government, or any of your funding is sort of tied to you meeting federal standards for your site to make sure that everyone can use it and it has some similar publication standards, I would say you could probably use WxT. You won't gain as much from the branding side of things and the pre-defined themes, but you still have all the different parts and all the markup that you can use as basically a base theme, and then go from there. Plus all the functionality and stuff that's baked into WXT. So some other reasons that I've seen for people deciding to use the WXT profile for Drupal is that sometimes they're just staff members that if they've been using Wet and WetBow for like forever, and they have a new site that need to build, and you don't really want to relearn everything or rewrite stuff from scratch. So like, why not? I already know how this thing works. It's built. It still works on Drupal 10. It's relatively modern, except for the framework and the jQuery part. But there's institutional familiarity with it. So I would say, why not? Give it a shot. Or if you're like, is Robin still? No. Anyways, if you're like Open Plus, and like you basically like do this, well, I assume, I don't know what he does day to day, but if you're mainly focusing your clientele on helping and supporting the federal government, then you may want to standardize your Drupal builds off of what WXT provides by default, because it's a safe bet that, like I said, the accessibility and the multilingual stuff will be accepted. You can reuse your components between departments. You can contribute right into the project if you want to. So there's advantages there. Okay, so reasons why you shouldn't use WXT or WetBow or the Drupal install profile. If you have like no affiliation with like the federal government, or no need for multilingual, or no need for accessibility. I mean, everyone should do it anyways, but like if you have none of that requirement, like basically just don't. Like you can still build an accessible Drupal site and build a multilingual or multilingual functional website without using WXT. It's not the only way to do it, right? So because if you don't need any of the stuff that it brings out of the box, then like why use that box? I mean, it doesn't really make much sense there. So you might want to correct me on this one. I'm pretty sure it still has some rudimentary support for IE. So if you, for some reason, you still need to support like IE 11, WXT might be an okay like starting point too, because it does have a lot of stuff.
It's pretty much dead now.
Yeah, but it still has the Bootstrap side, which still technically works with it, but I don't know.
IE 11?
No, I know it's end of life, but for like let's say you're like a hospital.
I'm thinking IE 8 because I know we ripped out IE 8 support, IE 9 support recently.
Yeah. So let's say you're running on ancient hardware and you're not going to get it. You're building an intranet for like a poorly funded hospital or something like that, and you need this to actually work. Well, there's a lot of fixes and things that people spend years putting in that you might benefit from, even if you aren't using like don't really care about the branding and all that other stuff, but it happens to support this ancient browser because you're for some reason running Windows XP on this tiny little workstation at a desk. So, but yeah, if you don't need it, like it frees you from the confines of Bootstrap. You can use more modern things like, well, you could use Bootstrap 5, or you could use Tailwind, or you could use any other like new fancy framework that we'll talk about later. Okay, so live demo. So let's go see what it's like to set up a project and get going with WXT, and then the install profile, and see how long it takes me to get to a branded Canada.ca page, right? Is this the right? Nope, that's the other one. New window. Open recent. Custom WXT. Oh, there it was. Okay. So on the WXT website, get started. General installation. Okay. So just like with Drupal core, you have the core recommended project, or your starter project for Drupal core. Here, let me zoom in a bit, because that's tiny. Plus. There you go. So WXT itself also has a recommended starter project to to base your site on. So what we're going to do, we're going to go and create that project on 10.2. And I will say the documentation with WxT is also very nice. I won't turn that on. Yes, okay. This is my ready to go one in case things go horribly wrong.
Control Shift install. Or Control Shift I.
Okay. Okay. CD. Dev. Okay. My new site. All right. So I can run compose a create project, and then I'm going to specify I want the 10.2 version of it, and then call it like my new WxT. Oh right, sorry. Ignore platform Rex. Oh, I have to.
Yeah, there we go.
Come on, it's the first command I run. How did I mess it up? All right. Okay. So by running this, this is it's setting up a composer file that will have the WxT dependency in it. You can see here it's downloading, applying all the patches. Like I said, there's a lot of patches. So what's nice about WxT is that someone already took the time Joseph's already took the time to find all of these, and then maybe even write some of them, and then put them into the thing. So this fixes a lot of the multilingual or accessible or whatever bugs that come up with trying to build a site with Drupal.
Yeah.
Yeah. The
kind of less patches.
yeah. Well, yeah. The downside is you have all of these patches, and if at any point one of them doesn't apply anymore for some reason, you have to tell your composer file to ignore that patch, because WxT is still going to try and bring it in. Because versions don't come out like every day, but you can patch ignore, and then you can still get your site
that
up
would
and running.
probably that would end up bad usually. What I normally do is if the patch has a patch number, which takes you to it's the Drupal node ID. So
Yeah, you can
usually,
replace
usually somebody else has re-rolled the patch, or
Yeah,
it could be a
or
merge
if it got
request.
rolled in already, then you just patch ignore. And
It could be a merge diff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
So
Exactly. Yeah. It could have been fixed, and then you don't need the patch anymore. Then you have to do.
yeah.
You would just make an issue in the Drupal WxT queue.
Yeah.
Tell us that it's broken.
Yeah, but if you're trying to get up and going, sometimes what happens, like when I was prepping my demo, I had these 6 things that just wouldn't apply anymore because they actually did get fixed in whatever version of those modules. So getting started with WxT that way is actually pretty fast. So now I have a composer file. I have some code running, so let me just open this in my container. The opening container. That's 3. Okay, been talking 15 minutes. Good. Okay, Drush, SQL, drop. Yes.
I thought. Oh, you did 5.1. I thought you did 5.2.
Yeah, it's part of the. You'll see. You'll see.
Okay.
Yeah. SQL query dash file equals HTML install. Okay, so I have a build of WxT here, and just make sure it's still the correct one. Yeah, that does. And I have a fresh install. I saved us from walking through the installer, but there you go. So I loaded the database, I clear my cache, address ULI, get my link, I click on the link, and if I go here, yay! Pause for applause. There we go. All right. So I have a branded-ish, Canadian-looking something inside running in Drupal. Great, I can just get to work and do whatever I want. Hold on a second. Yeah, default. Right. Okay. So in the olden days of WXT, specifically pre-10, when you actually installed it, it gave you everything. Like it turned everything on. So after an install, you had to go and like, I don't want this, I don't want this, I don't want this, I don't want this, and then you just, you spend like 20 minutes like uninstalling things. Thankfully, in the Drupal 10 version, all of the WXT stuff is mostly off by default, and then you can turn on the parts that you actually want to use, which is great. Now the trick becomes knowing what to turn on and what actually is there, because now you, for the most part, right now all you can do is on the base installs sort of just change. Let's make it look like the Canada.ca. I could save. Might have to clear cache. I definitely have to clear cache.
Yeah, rebuild the cache.
There's the yeah. So this is pretty much all you can do with it out of the box. You've just got, you can choose your branding and go for it. If I go back to extend, I have this plethora of like existing functionality that I can choose from that like other people are using, that has, there was clearly at some point somebody needed something, and then they decided, it's like, you know what, let's implement it as a module, and then let's add it to the distro. So you can have breadcrumbs, carousels, comments. There's the CK editor config. There's all sorts of, it's its own like mini ecosystem, if you will, of things that other departments or other parts of the, or other users of WXT have implemented. So, so let's go and try and turn on one of these features. And so this leads into what I think is one of the disadvantages of the way WXT is currently implemented. So let's just go turn on the editor. I think it's called WXT editor. Where are you? Editor. So I'm going to check out that one box. I'm going to hit install. And then now it wants to turn on Blazy, Media, CKR, CKR4, CKR4 Code Mirror, CKR5 Code Mirror, CKR5, CKR5 Code Mirror, Detailed Plugin, Footnotes, Fake Objects, TOC API, TOC API, Media Image, Responsive Image. Okay, I couldn't even do that in one breath. All right, Media Image, Media, anyways, it's turning on a lot. And so all you wanted to do was have an editor. Now that editor has a lot of features in it, clearly. But by turning one thing on, you get like this giant bucket of stuff that you now have to enable and then keep tabs on its config and then keep up to date. So we're going to hit continue. It shouldn't break. Shouldn't break. Come on. There it goes. All right. So it turned on 20 modules, brought in a bunch of translations, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. So now I can use the editor. Yay. But it's not always this way. So sometimes, just by turning one thing on, you basically unlock WXT. So now turning on other things is actually a lot lighter. So if we want to use the built-in workflows that are baked into WXT, I can go to work. That's not how you spell workflow. There you go. And I can turn on WXT extend workflow, hit install, and then that's it. So it's not asking me to do anything else because the CK editor guy took care of basically everything. And then now I can just turn this one on and sort of move on. So yeah, so this is what it's like building out functionality, building out a site using the install profile. So what I like about this version specifically is the concept of building up. Okay, so this is one of the reasons why I'd say like Lightning wasn't the most popular, or even the old version of WXT wasn't was kind of annoying to get started with. Is that you start with this giant thing with everything on, and then you got to turn everything off, and then that causes some weird things. Some stuff might assume that because it should always be on because it was already on, but this version lets you build your site up. You only have the stuff on that you actually need for the most part. Everything, I already talked about that. Great. Okay, so when you're dealing with the install profile, the thing to note about keeping WXT up to date, because that's one of the biggest problems that I've noticed in seeing deployments of WXT in the government, is that someone will start it, they'll do this, they'll install the site, and then they'll never run an upgrade ever again. Like I've started working on sites that haven't been updated in like a year and a half, and you're just like, great, this is great. So you really do want to keep WXT up to date, because jumping, it was like, oh, WXT 5.1, okay, you know what, and the latest is what, 5.3 or something, 5.2.9 or whatever. It's okay, all right, I'll just install the latest and be done with this. Like, no, do not do that. Every version, most of the time, when WXT is creating a release, it's not just updating core, it's updating probably, you know, a half dozen other modules along with it. And then there's very specific update hooks that run for that particular upgrade. And so every tiny release of WXT is actually a really big release to push out. So what we typically recommend is that in the composer file, don't just leave the version of WXT wide open. We actually use version pinning. So we just say, I want, in this case, I think it's 5.1.1, and then never get me any other version other than that until I'm ready for the next one. And because, like I said, WXT can include months of changes in one release. So definitely do your upgrades one step at a time. As tedious as it might be, especially if you're already out of date, do them one at a time, ship it to prod, do the next one, ship it to prod, and so on. Thankfully, the upgrade process is usually, it's not so bad. There were some rough ones in there, especially when we were cleaning out all the lightning stuff in Drupal 9. But it's just composer require specifically the version of WXT you want. I leaned into the mic for that one. Specifically the version of WXT that you want. Clear cache, updb, and then WXT ships with its own drush command for running its upgrades. So you want to make sure to run those too. They're not super often that they exist, but every once in a while there's one, and you really want to make sure you run it. And then, optionally, if it changed config, make sure to export that and capture it, because you don't want to ship the old broken config. So managing WXT Drupal is a little different than managing just Drupal itself. Yeah. So the thing to note about upgrading WXT is even if you bring it up to date, sometimes you go into the site and then you get that big banner that says, hey, your site's out of date. You're like, well, what the hell? I just spent like 20 days upgrading this site that hadn't been upgraded in 3 years. Well, that's because sometimes the dependencies of the modules aren't running necessarily on latest. So just because you brought it as up to date as you can, sometimes there's things you still have to leave out of date until you're sure that they're ready to actually be upgraded, or you can force them, yes, if you want to.
Yeah.
But there's risks involved with doing that, because sometimes you push it too far and then your site breaks. So yeah, that's like you can upgrade, but then it's your fault if it breaks. Yeah. Okay, so just a quick note about recipes in WXT. I fully expect WXT to use the bejesus out of recipes, because it seems to be exactly what they were trying to do in the first place. Have stock functionality that people can use whenever they want, that's guaranteed to be multilingual and pre-configured, blah, 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 but not necessarily having a strict opinion on how it gets used day to day, so like a decent starting point and then extend it from there. So I don't know anything about recipes being actually implemented inside of WXT. Joseph probably knows what's happening, but well, you can talk to him afterwards if you want. Okay. All right, so what about WXT Bootstrap? So that is the theme that the distro actually ships with. And before, using that separately from WXT Drupal was kind of tricky, and it didn't sub-theme well and a bunch of other things. But nowadays, you actually can just install the theme and the library, WXT libraries, because it brings in the styles and stuff, separate from the install profile. So if all you're looking for is the branding, you don't really want to bring all the dependencies along with it, and because maybe your site is going to be government looking-ish, but it's a completely custom application for this completely other like use case. Like I don't know, you're running your AI hub thing that like Robin was talking about earlier. Well, you don't really need any of the WXT stuff, so why bring all those dependencies and modules into your site when you don't need them? So, the advantages of just using the theme versus using WXT are you can use your own custom features. So if you already have workflows that you like working with, if you have a completely different use case for it, you can use those. But you're responsible for all of your own stuff. The upgrades to the site are arguably much easier because you have 2 dependencies instead of a couple hundred. And I would argue could perform a little bit better because once again you're only bringing 2 things instead of turning on like the kitchen sink. So there are reasons why you might just want to use just the theme itself. So the disadvantage of using the theme is obviously fewer features. So if you do want to set up CK Editor, well, go ahead. You have to set up CK Editor by yourself. You turn on the module, configure the buttons that you want, can make sure it works multilingual, blah, 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 all that stuff. You are still technically stuck on the old front end. So we haven't gotten around the fact that it still uses Bootstrap and jQuery. So you're still stuck with those. And if something does break in your particular use of this, like I implemented this feature with the markup from WXT, and for some reason, my accordion is just like the arrows like up here for some reason. Well, you're probably not going to get an upstream fix for that broken accordion. You're going to have to actually fix it. So it's a lot easier to make frequent, smaller changes than to wait for like a whole quarter or a whole year. Make changes at once. I said that. So just want to reiterate, do that, 1. And then 2, this becomes a lot easier when you're just doing the theme because you can just, hey, new version of Core, ship it. Let's go with the theme. Oh, new version of CTools, new version of whatever. Like you can just bring those changes in as they come out, make sure they work, and then ship it. You don't have to wait a few months to get that new version just to discover it's like, oh, I just wrote all this code, or I configured all these things that now are incompatible because this module went from version 1 to version 2. So it frees you up to keep things more up to date. Okay, here we go again. More live demos. I was going to live upgrade. That's why I installed the old version, because I was going to go from 5.1 to 5.2.3, but I looked at the time and I don't have time. So let me close this container. Close that one. Okay. So, to get started with just the theme. Wow. Okay. So this composer file has, well, you know what? I should bring up the old one just for comparison. Recent. Winstone WxT. So if you see here, in the previous one where I was using the install profile proper, there's a dependency right here that says Drupal WxT with the whatever version. And then there's also a repository that has all of the composer repository that has all the dependencies that WxT actually depends on, defined in there. If I'm using just the theme, yep, there we go. I still need this guy, because the custom repo over on GitHub that's managed by the WxT team. But then the only 2 dependencies I have, or direct ones, would be WxT library and WxT bootstrap. And these you just composer require those 2 in your existing Drupal site, or you can create a new site, from scratch if you want. But those are the only only 3 changes you need to make to this file to start using it. And then you would just reopen the container. Reopen. So this is actually Drupal 10.3. That last site was 10.1. I think 10.1. Yeah. And this is using slightly newer versions of the WxT library and of the WxT theme itself. But if I do a Drush CR, Drush UI, because I've already enabled the theme, I go to Appearance. You can see here I have the WXT Bootstrap theme set as the default. You can see Drupal's normal Bootstrap module there. And if I go back to the site, hey, look at that, federal government branded website, yay! Pause. Okay, all right, that's fine. We already did that joke. All right, so so I've done two different ways to get basically to the same point. So I have one site that has like everything the WXT brings with it, with all the patches, the multilingual fixes, and whatever. And here I have most of the accessibility and the branding and the multilingual aspects of the theme here, but none of the other pieces. So I can drop this onto, like I said, my existing Drupal site, or I can put it into, or I can start from scratch and just work with this. And we have a few clients where we've actually done this with, because, like I said, they didn't need any of the content workflows or the content types that came with WXT itself. How do I go back to slideshow? Yeah. So the advantages of this way, as far as upgrades go, like I mentioned, it's just a normal dependency. You don't need to pin anything. You can just say, give me the latest of whatever. If you're making very specific things to the theme, you might want to like hold to a version. But for the most part, this is usually pretty safe. And then you can sub-theme the theme itself. So that's probably the safest way to operate. So you just inherit the styles and the stuff from WXT itself, and then you customize it on your own. And then you just run composer update Drupal WXT star, and that'll take care of making sure library and what's it called? WXT Bootstrap are both kept up to date, and then you can just run your new usual drush deploy command without having to run any of the WXT custom ones. So if you have an existing workflow for deploying Drupal sites, it'll just work. So one example of the site, we actually just finished this one. So the Transportation Safety Board, they went from 10,000 individual HTML files to one Drupal site, which was really fun to write migrations for. But they are on the stock, I think it's 10.3, and it is using a version of WXT Bootstrap as the theme. So everything that they had underneath, they custom built, but it still managed to get the branding and all the WXT stuff into it, but without having to use the install profile.
Are they still not using GitLab or Git?
They are, yes, they are.
They started using Git?
Yeah. Yeah. So, going beyond even those two options. So remember, WxT is a spec. And just like Rob was talking about earlier, like the government is working on like a new spec and a new look and a new whatever. So you don't necessarily have to use either of those options. You could use WXT, you could use just WXT Bootstrap, or you can custom implement your own version of like WxT and its markup and its functionality in your newest, latest, whatever framework that you want to use. This is obviously a lot more work, and as the spec changes and stuff, I mean, it's pretty set in stone at this point. I don't think anybody's really making huge changes to current WxT. So another example is the Open Government website. They're running something called GC Web Bootstrap or something, which seems to be their own implementation of WxT for their site to meet their particular needs. So you can go this route if you want to. They obviously clearly had some sort of custom thing that they had to integrate into the site. Because if you ever use this, there's a tool called Wapalizer that sort of scans websites to tell you what technology they're using. For some reason, their website reports that they're using Drupal and the Adobe Experience Manager at the same time as the CMS.
Oh, really?
I don't know how they pulled that off. But anyways, I'm assuming it has something to do with the theme. Yeah. So if you are going to go that route and be like, you know what, I'm going to make the next greatest super accessible multilingual whatever Drupal site ever that looks exactly like every other federal government website. These are some resources that we use whenever we're building sites that just need to be accessible and multilingual in the first place. Like a lot of our clients don't follow the WxT spec, but still need to pass the WCAG and the ODA. So the first link right there, so I don't know if anybody saw Nick's talk earlier about accessible menu. I think it's pretty great. Follows the ARIA's stock of implementation for how menus should work. We're actually working on implementing more parts of that spec as like practically usable components in websites. Hence, that's the other thing. If you are going to go rogue and do your thing, basing your implementations off of those ARIA patterns is a great way to have like an excellent starting point, and for the most part, pass any kind of accessibility audit that you could run into. The Axe Dev tools, obviously, if you want to do a little bit of automated testing inside of your browser. So on the multilingual side, Drupal's pretty, like I mentioned, it's pretty great at multilingual already. Most things happen to work, like config translations and all that stuff, but the localization suite and /L10N client is a pretty neat little module. It lets you like in-page see the text and then translate the text in the context of where that text is being used, which is a real big help for translators, because sometimes what you're seeing around the content is important for why you would translate a particular word. String overrides. This one lets you actually change the root text string to be something else. So let's say, it's really easy to translate stuff like either into French or into Spanish or whatever. But if you need to change the English, like the source text, which is usually English, string overrides is a good way to do that. And then there's also on Drupal.org, they have some pretty decent documentation on setting up Drupal in a multilingual fashion. They have an entire guide. The link was really long, but anyways, I'll give you the slides afterwards. You can get that out there. But yeah, that guide explains all the different parts of Drupal. They're translatable. Links off to some of these other things too. So I would highly recommend referencing those. Okay, what's my time? Almost bang on. All right, perfect. Any questions? Yes.
So, does WxT use any tool to allow the content editors to check for accessibility on the content they're writing?
To check the accessibility of the content they're writing in the CK editor. So CK editor 4 had an accessibility checker. CK editor 5, I don't think they finished porting it the last time I checked, or it's a paid feature now. I don't know. That accessibility editor, did they finish porting that guy to, or its accessibility checker for the CK editor button? Did they finish porting that yet? Probably not. If it doesn't sound familiar. There was a decent one for 4, but I don't think it works with 5 anymore.
Yeah, still not using.
I mean,
It will be just whatever CK editor has.
yeah, because it's still a CK editor in the end. It's just there's like because CK editor 5 was weird, and it's up with like, oh, you can't link to anchors, or spell check is paid. And you're like, okay, thanks, yeah, that's great. Yeah. Any other questions? Somebody is like, God, I'm not even going to eat supper tonight. I'm going to go build a federal government website. Yeah? No? Okay. Well, thank you for coming to Drupal Camp. Stick around. We got prizes to give away. And, you can talk to me. I'll be over there.